Dr. Sara Loom's day at Helix Laboratories had started like any other, cataloging specimens, running tests, maintaining the strict protocols that kept their cutting-edge research safe. But one small slip would change everything. The specimen had arrived that morning, an iridescent green liquid that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. Extraterrestrial biological sample, the manifest had said. Sara had handled hundreds of unusual substances before, all properly contained in their reinforced glass vessels. She never saw the hairline crack in the container. The first drop touched her skin like ice. Sara gasped, watching in horror as her hand began to take on a sickly green hue. Her colleagues backed away, their faces masks of shock, as the transformation spread rapidly across her body. The pain was intense, not burning, but stretching, changing, reforming. Yet underneath the pain, there was something else, a strange, electric thrill that made her heart race. A new wave of panic seized her as she felt a tingling sensation across her scalp. Her long blonde hair, which she'd always taken such pride in, began falling out in clumps, scattering across the laboratory floor like abandoned gold. She reached up with transforming hands, feeling the smooth, hardening skin where her hair had been. The loss of this last vestige of her humanity sent a sob catching in her throat, but it turned into something else, something closer to a growl. Her skin began to ripple, hardening into armored plates that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The transformation crawled up her arms, each finger elongating into razor-sharp claws that scraped against the laboratory floor. Sara tried to scream, but her voice caught in her throat as her neck began to stretch and twist, vertebrae cracking and reforming. With each change, new sensations flooded her mind, power coursing through her altered muscles, strength she'd never known possible. The change reached her face, and Sara felt her jaw begin to shift. Bones cracked and reformed as her mouth elongated into a reptilian muzzle. Her teeth, once perfectly aligned from years of orthodontic work, began to sharpen and multiply, becoming rows of deadly fangs. Her tongue lengthened grotesquely, turning green and sinuous. The world took on new dimensions as her eyes transformed, turning a brilliant amber gold. Terror gripped her human mind, but something else was awakening, primitive, predatory instincts that made her blood sing with excitement. Every movement felt more graceful, more powerful. The sense of the laboratory became sharper, richer, filling her transforming brain with new information. She could smell her colleagues' fear, and to her horror, part of her relished it. "Get out! Lock down the lab!" She managed to roar through her transforming mouth, the words barely recognizable as human speech. Her lab coat split at the seams as multiple serpentine tails burst from her lower back, whipping through the air with minds of their own. Each movement sent lab equipment crashing to the floor as her new appendages sought balance. The chaos should have frightened her, but instead, she felt a surge of wild exhilaration. The metamorphosis continued relentlessly. Her skin, now completely transformed into armored plates, developed intricate patterns of darker green striations. Her muscles rippled and grew beneath the armored hide, granting her new form terrible strength. With each passing second, the alien instincts grew stronger, the urge to hunt, to chase, to prove her dominance as an apex predator. The rational scientist in her mind wrestled with these new impulses, even as another part of her embraced them. As the containment alerts blared through the facility, something shifted in her transformed mind. The terrified human scientist, so desperately clinging to her identity, began to fade like a distant dream. Yet her knowledge remained. Every chemical formula, every biological process, every scientific principle was still crystal clear in her enhanced mind. She understood exactly what was happening to her at a molecular level, how the alien compound had rewritten her DNA. The difference was, she no longer cared about preserving her humanity. This new form wasn't a tragedy, it was an ascension. With fluid, predatory grace, she moved through the darkened laboratory. Each step, each sinuous movement of her tails, felt more natural than the last. Through the glass walls, she could see her former colleagues watching in horror. Dr. Martinez, who had mentored her through her PhD way, who had shared lunch with her every Wednesday. Jessica, who had just asked her to be a bridesmaid. Their fear was intoxicating, far sweeter than any of the bland social connections she'd maintained as a human. The way they trembled at her presence filled her with a savage joy that no published paper or successful experiment had ever matched. A low, satisfied hiss escaped her fanged maw as she surveyed her domain. She recognized every piece of equipment, every chemical compound on the shelves, but now she saw them through the eyes of a predator. The centrifuge wasn't just for separating samples. It could become a projectile. The chemical storage cabinet contained compounds that could disable the security systems. Her scientific knowledge hadn't diminished. It had been weaponized. The security locks engaged with heavy thuds, but she felt no fear. She knew the exact composition of the reinforced doors, understood precisely how much force would be required to breach them. Let them try their containment protocols. She flexed her claws against the floor, feeling the tiles crack beneath them. Their attempts at containment would fail, just as their attempts to control and study the alien substance had failed. They would learn, as she had, that nature, even alien nature, could not be contained by mere walls and doors. The predator that had once been Sara Loom smiled, revealing rows of gleaming fangs. She could already calculate a dozen ways to escape, could anticipate exactly how her former colleagues would react. Their predictable human responses seemed so quaint now, so limited. She had become something greater, a perfect fusion of scientific intellect and apex predator. Every cell in her transformed body sang with power and purpose. The security locks engaged with heavy thuds, reverberating through the sterile halls of Helix Laboratories like the tolling of a death knell. But Sara, or the entity that had once been Sara Loom, felt no fear. Her enhanced mind, a seamless blend of scientific precision and predatory cunning, had already dissected the situation. She knew the exact composition of the reinforced doors, titanium alloy with a carbon fiber core, designed to withstand forces up to 10,000 psi. She understood precisely how much force her new claws, now gleaming with an otherworldly sharpness, would need to exert to tear through them. The calculations danced in her mind as effortlessly as a predator stalking its prey. Let them try their containment protocols. She flexed her claws against the floor, the tiles cracking beneath them with a satisfying crunch, spiderwebbing outward like a map of her growing power. Their attempts at containment would fail, just as their hubris in studying and controlling the alien substance had failed. They would learn, as she had, that nature, even alien nature, could not be tamed by mere walls and doors. The thought sent a shiver of delight through her armored frame, her serpentine tail swaying with a rhythm that felt more natural with each passing second. The predator that had once been Sara Loom smiled, revealing rows of gleaming fangs that caught the flickering fluorescent light. She could already calculate a dozen ways to escape. The ventilation shafts, too narrow for a human, but easily navigable for her sinuous tails. The electrical conduits, which she could overload with a precise strike, or the doors themselves, which she could rend apart with brute force. She could anticipate exactly how her former colleagues would react. Dr. Martinez would call for evacuation, Wei would cling to his precious protocols, and Jessica would freeze, paralyzed by terror. Their predictable human responses seemed so quaint now, so limited, like the scurrying of mice before a hawk. She had become something greater, a perfect fusion of scientific intellect and apex predator. Every cell in her transformed body sang with power and purpose, a symphony of strength she'd never known as a mere human. But as she stood there, poised to strike, a new sound pierced the cacophony of alarms, a low, rhythmic hum emanating from the lab's central chamber. Her amber gold eyes narrowed, her heightened senses locking onto the anomaly. It wasn't machinery, it was alive, pulsing in sync with the alien energy still coursing through her veins. Curiosity, a remnant of the scientist she'd been, tugged at her instincts. She slunk forward, her claws clicking against the shattered floor, her tails weaving through the air like sentient shadows. The central chamber was a vault-like room, sealed behind a secondary set of blast doors. She'd never been granted access as a human, only the senior directors knew its secrets. But now, with a single swipe of her claws, the doors buckled and groaned, metal screeching as it gave way. Beyond them lay a sight that even her transformed mind struggled to comprehend. A massive cylindrical tank, glowing with the same iridescent green as the substance that had remade her. Inside, suspended in a viscous fluid, were dozens of humanoid shapes half-formed, grotesque amalgamations of flesh and alien anatomy. Some had claws like hers, others bore tails or jagged spines, but none were complete. Failed experiments, she realized, her scientific mind piecing together the puzzle even as her predatory side relished the implications. At the tank's base stood a control panel, its screens flickering with data. Sara approached, her elongated tongue flicking out to taste the air metallic, tinged with fear and chemicals. The readouts confirmed her suspicions. Helix hadn't merely stumbled upon the alien substance. They'd been cultivating it, refining it, using it to create hybrids like her. She scrolled through the logs with a claw, her mind racing. Subject 001 through 19 terminated due to instability. Subject 020 her. The only success, the only one to retain her intellect amidst the chaos of transformation. A hiss escaped her fanged maw, equal parts fury and triumph. She wasn't an accident. She was their masterpiece. But before she could process the revelation, the hum intensified, and the tank began to shudder. Cracks spiderwebbed across its surface, and with a deafening roar, it shattered. Green liquid flooded the chamber, and the failed subject spilled onto the floor. Twisted, mindless creatures, their bodies writhing as they awoke. Their eyes, dull and feral, locked onto her, and guttural snarls filled the air. Sara's instinct surged. These weren't rivals, they were prey, inferior shadows of what she'd become. She lunged, her claws slashing through the first creature's malformed torso, green ichor spraying across the walls. Her tails whipped out, impaling two more, their bodies crumpling like broken dolls. The fight was a blur of motion and violence, her scientific mind analyzing their weaknesses, unstable joints, brittle plating, while her predatory nature reveled in the carnage. Within moments, the chamber was silent again, littered with the remains of Helix's failures. But the victory was short-lived. A new alert blared through the facility, sharper and more urgent than before. Containment breach detected. Initiating Protocol Omega. Sara's ears twitched, her enhanced hearing picking up the faint whine of machinery powering up. She darted to the control panel, her claws dancing across the keys. The screen displayed a countdown: 5 o'clock, 4:59, 4:58, Protocol Omega self-destruct. Helix wasn't just trying to contain her, they were willing to obliterate the entire facility to bury their secrets. Her mind raced, weighing options with cold precision. She could escape now, tear through the weakened outer walls, and vanish into the night. But the data on the panel, coordinates, research logs, names of the directors who orchestrated this call to her. If she left, she'd be free but ignorant. If she stayed, she could uncover the truth, but risked everything. The scientist in her demanded answers. The predator demanded survival. With a snarl, she made her choice. She smashed the panel, uploading the data to a portable drive she snatched from a nearby console. The countdown ticked relentlessly. 2:14, 2:13. She bolted from the chamber, her powerful legs propelling her through the collapsing corridors. Explosions rocked the facility, flames licking at her heels as she navigated the chaos. Debris rained down, but her tails deflected it with uncanny precision. Her body adapting to every threat, she reached the outer wall just as the final seconds ticked away. With a roar, she slammed her claws into the titanium barrier, tearing it apart like paper. The night air hit her as she leapt into the darkness, the facility erupting behind her in a fireball that illuminated the sky. She landed in the forest beyond, her armored form blending into the shadows, the drive clutched in her claw. Sara paused, her chest heaving, her senses drinking in the world beyond Helix's walls. The predator that had once been Sara Loom was free, but not finished. The data she held was a map to her creators, the architects of her transformation. They thought they'd crafted a weapon, but they'd underestimated her. She wasn't just a fusion of intellect and instinct, she was a reckoning. Her amber eyes gleamed as she vanished into the night, a low growl rumbling in her throat. The hunt had begun not for prey, but for justice. Helix had awakened something they couldn't control, and now, they would face the consequences. Every step she took echoed with purpose, her tail swaying like a promise of retribution. The world would tremble before her, and she would revel in it.